Something strange happens to almost everyone who finally starts earning real money, and nobody prepares you for it. The money shows up, and then it's gone, and your life looks better from the outside while your bank account tells you the same story it told you 3 years ago. That's the part nobody mentions, so let's actually talk about it. The hardest thing about building wealth has very little to do with earning. It's holding onto the money while your own brain works against you, and almost everyone loses that fight without realizing a fight was happening. The day a raise lands, something shifts before you've even made a decision about it. The apartment starts feeling small, the car feels old, the places you used to enjoy eating at feel a little below where you are now, and none of that came from a conscious thought. This is called lifestyle inflation, and it's the most predictable pattern in all of personal finance. Someone moves from $75,000 a year to $90,000, and that extra $15,000 never becomes wealth because it turns into an upgraded life that now costs $15,000 more to run every year. Look at how widespread this has gotten. In 2021, 42% of Americans said they were living paycheck to paycheck, and by 2026 that number reached 54%. More than half the country is one missed paycheck away from real trouble, and this happened during years when wages were actually going up. It also reaches much higher up the income ladder than you'd expect. A Goldman Sachs report found that 40% of households earning over $500,000 a year are still living paycheck to paycheck. If a salary that size doesn't fix the problem, then earning more was never going to be the solution on its own. Income and wealth are two completely different things, and people lose entire decades to that confusion. What makes it harder is how fast an upgrade stops feeling like an upgrade. Researchers have studied this since the 1970s and call it hedonic adaptation. The new car thrills you for about 6 weeks, and then it's just the car you drive. The bigger place feels enormous for a season, and then it's just where you live. Your baseline resets every single time, so you end up the same distance from feeling satisfied while spending considerably more money to stay in exactly the same emotional spot. People who build real wealth do something that feels genuinely uncomfortable at first. When their income climbs, they let their spending sit still for a while, long enough for the space between what comes in and what goes out to grow into something with real weight behind it. That space between earning and spending is where wealth actually comes from, and everything else in personal finance is a footnote to it. Here's the second thing nobody mentions. Building wealth is slow, and the slowness is what breaks people. Everyone wants the story about the person who timed a trade perfectly or sold a company at 29. Those stories are real, and they also have almost nothing to do with how most wealth gets built. The honest version looks like this. You do the same ordinary thing every month for 15 years, and for most of those years, almost nothing visible happens at all. Put $500 a month into the market at a 7% average return. After 5 years, you have around $36,000. And you put in 30,000 of that yourself, so the market handed you 6,000. It feels like you're doing all the work for very little in return. Keep going anyway. At year 20, you're near $260,000, and only about 120,000 of that came out of your paycheck. At year 30, you're around 610,000, and the majority of that number is money your money made while you were busy living your life. Compounding sites flat for years and then bends upward hard, and the bend only arrives for people who were still there when it happened. A research firm called Dolbar has tracked what real investors earn compared to the market itself going all the way back to 1985, and there's usually a gap. In 2024, the market climbed 25% while the average investor captured 16.5%, which was one of the widest gaps in a decade. That kind of difference comes from people selling when they're frightened and buying when they're excited, and they pay for those decisions with their retirement. Now here's the third thing, and it's the one people get defensive about. A lot of the financial advice you're consuming exists to sell you something. There's an entire industry built on keeping you convinced that you're behind and that the fix is one purchase away. Trading courses, signal groups, property seminars, newsletters promising the next big move before it happens. What they're actually selling is hope, and hope is a product that renews every month. Plenty of those people did get rich, but they got rich from the selling itself while the strategy inside the course sat there untested. One question clears out most of this noise. Does this person make their money from the strategy or from teaching the strategy? Ask that every single time and watch how much of the industry falls away. The fourth thing tends to land hardest because it goes against what most people believe they're working toward. Money changes less about how your days feel than you're expecting it to. The research here got misreported for over 10 years. A well known 2010 study suggested happiness stopped improving above $75,000 a year, and that number turned into a headline everyone repeated without reading the study. Then a 2021 study using real time phone data from 34,000 people found no ceiling at all. In 2023, the original researchers worked together to settle the disagreement, and what they found was more layered than either side had claimed. For most people, well-being does keep climbing as income rises. It climbs slowly though, and it takes enormous jumps in earnings to produce modest changes in how an ordinary day actually feels. For the least happy group, more money stopped helping once the basic pressure was gone, because whatever was making them unhappy had never been financial in the first place. So money matters, and it also doesn't do what people imagine it will do. What it really buys you is room. Room to leave a job that's wearing you down. Room to say no to things. Room to take a bad month without your whole life shaking underneath you. That's what wealth actually is. It's how much distance you've built between yourself and other people's power over your choices. The fifth thing sits underneath everything else on this list. Your relationship with money was mostly formed before you understood what money even was. Growing up watching your parents argue about bills tends to install an anxiety that stays with you long after your bank account is healthy. Growing up with scarcity can create someone who saves constantly and can never enjoy a single dollar of it. Growing up watching money disappear the same week it arrived tends to recreate that exact rhythm at every income level you ever reach. These patterns run below the logical part of your brain, which is why so many people know precisely what to do and still don't do it. Debt operates the same way, and the maths right now is punishing. As of the middle of 2026, the average interest rate on credit cards carrying a balance sits above 22%, and Americans owe more than $1.2 trillion on cards, which is a record. Trying to build wealth at 7% while paying 22% means you're moving backward at speed regardless of how disciplined your investing looks on paper. The emotional weight is worse than the arithmetic. Debt creates a constant low pressure that pushes people towards short-term decisions, and short-term decisions are exactly what compounding punishes hardest. So here's what actually works. Automate the transfer so the decision happens one time instead of every single month. Build 3 to 6 months of expenses in cash so fear stops driving your choices. Every time your income rises, let your spending stay where it is for a stretch and send the difference into investments. Clear high-interest debt before chasing returns, since that's the highest guaranteed return available to you anywhere. Keep your strategy simple enough to explain in one sentence and then leave it completely alone through whatever happens next. And spend real time understanding why you do what you do with money, because your behavior will decide the outcome long before your strategy does. Here's the last piece, and it's the one that changes everything. The person who ends up wealthy has different reflexes than you have right now, a different response to fear, and a different answer to the question of what enough looks like. They became that person over years, and the money followed. Running the maths is easy. Staying steady for 20 years while everything around you promises a faster route is the real work, and it will never make a good headline. It's also the only approach that has ever reliably worked. If any of this landed, do me a favor and hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there.